So ever since I uploaded this video, which was laying out the reasons for South Korea's 0.7 birth rate, a whole lot of drama has happened since then, both on here and on TikTok. So let me explain to you guys about everything that happened and explain to you exactly what the 4B movement is. So what had happened was I was scrolling on TikTok a few weeks ago and I just kept getting the same type of videos on my For You page. Videos made mostly by American women saying that all Korean women are following this thing called the 4B movement. Let me play a few of these videos.
The 4B movement is a movement in South Korea right now where the misogyny and sexism is so bad that South Korean women have decided to opt out of dealing with men entirely. That is not a joke. That is not an exaggeration. They are not dating men. They are not marrying men. They are not having children with men. They're not even sleeping with men anymore. And it's called the 4B movement because the Korean words for those four things all start with the letter B. This kind of first started happening around 2016 when Kim Ji-young, born 1982, a novel came out. And it is a fictional book about a Korean every woman and all of the misogyny and sexism that she's experienced from literally being a child all the way to her being an adult, suffering with postpartum depression after having her child. Now, this book became a runaway bestseller among South Korean women because they were like, she's just like me for real. And that's kind of when it started cooking, right? Now, the movement officially got its name in 2019, and it's just been going ever since. It's so successful, in fact, that now South Korea has one of the lowest birth rates in the world. The number of deaths in South Korea outnumber the number of births in South Korea. And it's hilarious because all the men and the government are like, oh my God, what do we do? They don't want to like talk to us. They don't want to date us. What do we do? Like everything's in shambles. We don't know what to do. When South Korean women have been very clear from day one, they're like, hey, either you get your act together or we are literally eliminating all of this. Like, we are shutting it down. So that's the 4B movement and why I'm so obsessed with it and why I think we should have the 4B movement everywhere.
I think it's so fucking funny that Korean women are so done with Korean men that they're literally just deciding to die out. Y'all heard of the 4B movement? I'm a big fan. Korean women literally just gave up on their men. They're like, they're fucking assholes. They're not gonna change. So we're all gonna go extinct. Which they literally are, by the way. Korea has like the lowest birth rates in the world. It's like really bad. But I just think that's so fucking funny. That's also very Korean. Like, Korean as an ethnicity is about to go away and Korean women are literally just like
I was trying to figure out where the sudden influx of 4B was coming from. So I typed in 4B Undong into Naver, which is Korea's biggest search engine. And there was no recent articles or anything in the news recently written about this. And so I typed it into English, into Google, and then I saw some few articles from Elle or The Cut. And the TikToks that were being made were referencing these sorts of articles. So I had seen these videos. And also my friend Annie, she had made a video on TikTok saying that most women in Korea do not know what the 4B movement is. So I decided to make one as well and clear everything up. This is the video that I made. So most of the 4B movement videos that I've seen on TikTok are made from foreigners and I think Korean Americans or just Asian people living in the West, but not actually people living in Korea. So like I said, I live in Seoul. The Western media likes to really pick up on these sensationalist, provocative topics and then makes it into an article and then everyone on TikTok follows suit and makes videos about it. I am 29, going to turn 30 this year, and literally all the conversations that I have with my friends around my age is about, oh my God, we're looking to get married, we need to find good partners and we need to do this before it gets too late or we're just like aged out of their marriage market, you know? There are services in Korea like marriage matchmaking services where people go and you pay a broker and you submit all this information about yourself, your income, your assets, your family background, if you have any debt, like which university you went to, you submit all that information and then they will try to match you up with people who they think that you're on par with. So people go to these marriage services and they're heavily used. There are literally so many in the country because everyone is using them. The 4B movement in Korea is a very, very small fraction of the whole Korean population in general. It's just the Western media likes to highlight that part and make it seem like it's the biggest issue in Korea, which it really is not. I can promise you that. Don't believe all those sensational articles written online all the time. Most people in Korea still like the other sex. We want to date, we want to find love, we want to get married. Those are like the big majority. And it's only the small group of extreme radical misandrists and extreme radical misogynists. They just seem like the loudest because the most attention goes to them. And since then, that video has racked up 1.2 million views on TikTok. And there were loads of people who are stitching it, making responses to it, and also people getting upset that I used the phrase extreme radical misandrists. But I'll speak about this in a bit. So this term 4B originated in Korea circa 2017 to 18 from feminist Twitter groups. And I'm getting this information from a Korean website called femiwiki.com, which is similar to Wikipedia, I'm guessing. And this website was made in 2016 by Korean women. So I'm getting it directly from the source. And on this website, they define 4B as radical feminism's motto for non-marriage, non-birth, non-love, and non-sex. So in the literal sense, it's a concise expression of celibacy, but the radical feminist groups use it as a feminist slogan with the intent of dismantling the patriarchy rather than the meaning of celibacy due to personal preferences and choices. But truthfully, I had never heard of this term 4B before, and neither had any of my friends or family. There are plenty of people currently doing 비혼 and 비출산, which means no marriage and no kids. And in my previous video, I listed out the reasons as to why this is happening. People are much more individualistic these days. They prefer being free and living life on their own terms. Getting married and having kids is expensive as hell and too much of a burden. But 4B is much more than that. It's rejecting dating and having sex as well, which is quite extreme. So when I saw those videos of these American women saying that all Korean women are giving up on their men and shunning them away, and this is what's going on in Korea, I just felt the need to point out that no, these women doing 4B are not the majority of the Korean population. And yes, there is a growing number of people choosing not to get married and have kids, but despising and hating men is not the main factor for this, as those TikToks were making it out to be. And the reason why I brought up the marriage matchmaking service in my TikTok video was just to prove the point that many people in Korea are still actively wanting and trying to find a partner to settle down with. I found it hilarious how some people were suggesting I was being paid by some of these companies. Please show me where in my bank account where that money is. Please, I would like to see. There are estimated to be around 3,000 of these services in the country with a total market size of 50 billion to 70 billion Korean won, which is around $35 to $50 million. They claim to be more successful than ever, even during these 비혼 times, and customers keep coming to them to try and find a suitable partner. The same goes for dating apps. The usage of dating apps was obviously at its highest during COVID times because people were locked inside and they couldn't really go outside so much. But since those restrictions have eased now, the dating app market hasn't taken a hit. The number of downloads of dating apps stood at 1.187 million as of January of this year, which is up from 8% compared to a year ago. From my observation and from everyone around me, everyone still wants to date, still wants to try and find someone. There are, of course, many people, even including myself, where we're like, I want to take a break from dating. I just can't be bothered with it right now. Obviously, there are time periods when you go through that, but I've yet to meet anyone around me who genuinely says, I will just not date at all anymore. But there are also certain people in society who can't date no matter how much they want it and no matter how hard they try. They're referred to as involuntary celibate people, or for short, incels. These kinds of people end up developing extreme unhappiness, loneliness, and dissatisfaction with the world. And they have a tendency to turn to online communities where they can find other people in similar situations for support. And this can be for both men and women. The problem with these online communities is that they can turn toxic extremely fast. Hurt, lonely, angry people gathering together usually yields some unsavory results. And this leads to communities such as the male-centered misogynistic Ilbe and the creation of Megalia in 2015 that was full of misandristic posts, which was mirroring the actions of Ilbe users. And yes, I do mean to say misandry, because TikTok people got very triggered that I said that word and said that it wasn't real. What do you mean it's not real? In the dictionary definition, misandry means hatred or prejudice against men, and misogyny means hatred or prejudice against women. And on Megalia and Ilbe, both sexes were posting some extreme things about the opposite sex. These were considered so toxic and so extreme that it was considered social suicide for anyone to admit freely that they were an active member on one of these communities. I'm going to list out some of the examples of the things that they did. I'm not sure if I can even put this on YouTube without getting demonetized. If I can't, I'll just put it in the link down below. So these kind of online communities are literal cancer and a breeding ground for hate, which is why I said extreme radical misandrous in my TikTok video, and I won't back down from saying that because it's true. I saw many people commenting, well, misandry doesn't harm anyone. Well, you can clearly see from the examples that I gave above that clearly it does harm. I believe hatred against men is just as real as hatred against women, and I can't have a reasonable conversation with you if you think that's not the case. This is why the word feminism is viewed with such disdain in Korea. When I lived in the UK and when people said, I'm a feminist, sometimes even men would say, I'm a feminist. It was just like a really peaceful, I believe in equal rights and opportunities for men and women. That was the only meaning. But in Korea, the concept of feminism wasn't really in the public sphere until about 2015, when websites like Megalia opened as a response to the incel online communities and they mirrored all of the horrible things that they were doing. So they ended up becoming exactly the same and just as bad. There was no peaceful or reasonable feminism in Korea from the beginning. It was all about hating and mocking men, which is why if someone in Korea comes out and says, I'm a feminist, seen as a psychosis or someone with really questionable ethics, it would be the equivalent of a guy proudly saying, hey, I'm an Andrew Tate supporter. That's how feminism is viewed. Megalia ended up dissolving due to the disputes about the posts about the gay men, and the group of people who opposed the decision to ban these posts, they left and formed another website called WOMAD, which is just as bad, if not worse, than Megalia. WOMAD is still up and running, but it's not active at all. There were not many active users when I went to visit it, but some of the posts I was already seeing, it was like, I want to murder a Hannam bastard, which Hannam is a very derogatory term for Korean men. So he's like, I want to kill Korean men. So I just left immediately. And the other feminists that were left from Megalia, they either went to Twitter or another website called 여성시대. So that's why unless you're within those feminist groups, most Korean women have not heard of this term 4B. I asked everyone around me if they had heard it when it was blowing up on TikTok and they were all like, what's that? And if I try to explain to you guys why Korean men seem to be so anti-feminist, because from a Westerner's perspective, it looks bizarre. I understand. Of course, there might be some pushback in feminism in other countries too, but it's quite rare to see 20-something-year-old men holding rallies protesting against feminism, like how they do in Korea, right? And everyone brings up the fact Korea has the worst gender pay gap among the OECD nations, so why are they protesting? So let me explain to you why this is happening. First, the issue of mandatory military service is a deep point of contention within Korea. Men used to spend 2 years, now it's been reduced to 1 year and 6 months, but they have to serve for Korea with extremely low wages, get no respect from the public. Some might get injured or killed sometimes, while women are graduating and getting into the job market. And if suddenly North Korea attacks us right now, all the fit, able men just have to go and serve, no questions asked, while the women stay home. So in this way, men are already viewing women as more privileged. And also in terms of if there's an accident on a plane, on a ferry, on a ship, who gets rescued first? Women and children. Secondly, the Korean men in their 20s right now is different from the men who are my dad's generation who definitely did benefit from the patriarchy. For example, my dad, he is one of 5, he is the middle child, and he has 2 older aunties, but they couldn't go to university, but my dad could because he was considered the man of the family. The men have to go, get a good education, and get a good job. Whereas my 2 older aunties, they couldn't go. So he always feels a sense of guilt about this. And yes, there was a preference back in the day for boys being born, but this has long time been demolished because that was when Korea was still kind of coming out of poverty. Only boys could go into higher education and earn a decent living. But now women make money too, and just as many, if not more, women are enrolling into higher education. And daughters are viewed as treating and looking after the parents much more compared to sons when they're older. So many people are saying, oh, I want to have a daughter these days instead of a son. People bring up that feminist book, Kim Ji-young, born 1982, to bring up examples of how Korean women are treated so unfairly in the home. But times have changed since then, and most women now will simply not tolerate being treated like a slave by the in-laws. The generation of the mother-in-law telling the daughter exactly what to do and just belittling her and all of this is just not the case anymore from real examples around me. And if that is the case, most women will just be like, I'm out, I'm getting a divorce. So the men in their 20s now feel frustrated and angry when they haven't done anything wrong, but they keep getting blamed for the patriarchy and all the unjust things that women have to go through. The older generations, yes, definitely. But for the young ones, it's just like, what did we do? We haven't done anything. For them, they see it as an even playing field. And some even view, because they have to go to do military service for 2 years, they view themselves in the disadvantaged position. And lastly, like I mentioned before, when feminism entered Korea, it was never peaceful or reasonable. From the beginning, it was just the hate-filled, misandrous kind of feminism. Innocent 20-something-year-old men suddenly being told, you're all rapists and killers and abusers. And understandably, they got very angry and frustrated at this. Being generalized and lumped in with the criminals with the mental issues who commit the crimes when they haven't done anything wrong. This is unfair. Since the Me Too movement as well, men are just kind of staying away from women in general, even talking to them with the fear of getting seen as inappropriate and getting reported on. sometimes falsely accused as well, which is another problem. So there was a Korean American TikToker, I think her name is Hajin, who reacted to my video and she wanted me to address something. So I'll do that now. First, she said in her video, I will link it down below if you want to watch it. She said she's a victim of sexual abuse within her family, which I am so sorry to her that that happened. And I really have empathy for her for that. She doesn't live in Korea and she uses K-dramas as an example of gender roles in Korean society. And she says that women don't get parental leave, which is wrong. The current paid parental leave is 1 year and 6 months, which is an increase from the previous 1 year. There's also a reduced work hours system now. So 2 working parents can work for 15 to 30 hours per week compared to the mandatory 40 hours. And also paternity leave for the father is being increased from 10 days to 20 days following the birth of the child. And there are also many number of cash subsidies paid towards the parents for a number of years from the child's birth. The Korean government are seriously freaking out about the birth rate, so they're throwing literally all of the money at this problem. And hopefully some of the measures they're taking will help the problem somewhat, but we'll have to see about that. I agree with her that the Korean justice system is fucked and criminals don't get sentenced enough. She also says she gets cringed out by the gender roles that she sees in Korean dramas. Like men have to be like this and women have to be like this, which I agree. But is this a Korea problem or a worldwide problem? Because we have that kind of everywhere. And I agree that some gender expectations can be harmful. Like you're a man should never cry, you should never show your tears, or saying to a girl like you should always be submissive and obedient and never talk back. But we do have to accept that some gender roles and expectations are going to be there forever. For example, I can't imagine a world where finance bros are going into work wearing pretty sundresses. That's just not going to happen. They're going to wear a shirt and trousers, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. We can't get rid of all gender norms because then we would be walking around in a genderless utopia where everyone is one and the same and we wear the exact same things and nobody is any different from each other. Just fantasy and not going to happen. And personally, for me, I want to be the one wearing a wedding dress on my wedding day, not my husband. She points out that Korea has a hierarchical society and that leads to the abuse of power over women. And yes, I agree this happens. But also, is this a thing that's unique to Korea? Because this also happens everywhere. Jeffrey Epstein and Harvey Weinstein comes to mind. She said this abuse of power is ingrained in every fabric of Korean society, which is a very bold claim to make. And I would need to see statistics to back up this claim because that's saying that every single CEO or every man in position in power is abusing women, which if you're going to make that claim, you need to bring out the statistics. For me, when I watch the news and I see examples of abusers, rapists, and murderers, I don't automatically assume that all other Korean men are going to do the exact same thing. Are most criminals men? Yes, that's statistically true. Men have more testosterone and women have more estrogen, which makes us have more empathy and nurturing in nature, whereas men can be more aggressive and have more risk-taking tendencies. But if you actually look at all criminals' backgrounds, they have almost always come from a broken family, really troubled backgrounds. More often than not, they've experienced abuse as a child themselves, or they have mental issues such as schizophrenia, which causes them to harm others. This was the case in 2016 when a man killed a woman with a knife in a bathroom at Gangnam Station. And this incident really set fire to the gender wars. And women were saying that this was a pure act of misogyny, and that might have certainly been the case, but it's also true that he had been hospitalized 4 times prior for his schizophrenia, and he was known to have violent outbursts. So clearly he was not right in the head. But I do see a tendency from some people on TikTok saying that all Korean men are like this, which I don't agree with. And all I wanted to do in my first TikTok video, that 4B is not the dominant lifestyle among women living here right now. Most people want to find love and want to get married. It's literally in our human nature and ingrained into our DNA to live in packs and tribes. And there is a reason why our bodies release chemicals such as dopamine and oxytocin, which are feel-good chemicals, when we have sex. It's to encourage and motivate people into having sex and reproducing. We are social animals and we are wired for interaction. And humans can definitely live independently, but I don't think anyone is actually suited to live in complete isolation. And like I said, I really empathize and I feel very sorry for people who have been victims of abuse, domestic, sexual, all of it. I really respect people living their lives how they want to, but also I don't understand those people hating on women for choosing not to live like that. You should see the comments that I've been getting under my TikTok for saying, I want to find a man, I want to have a relationship and all of this. I'm going to read you some of the best comments. Maybe if you assume all men are safe, you'll end up raped and dead, but you do you, babe. Don't come crying when it happens to you. Hope you get picked soon. Lumping misogyny with Miss Andrie tells me everything I need to know, little Miss Pick Me. Actual male-centered bitch. You look like you need attention from Korea's misogynistic, weird and lonely men. You can have them, auntie. Nobody wants them, Ovi. And the huge irony is that this person has Jimin from BTS as their profile picture. I also liked this comment that said, 4B movement is also used by foreigners to demonize Korean men. I liked it because I think it's true. They view incidents like Burning Sun, Nth Room, and all of that, and assume that all Korean men are like this. I get comments like, isn't domestic violence really high over there? Women are getting killed at alarming rates. They don't provide any links to statistics to back up this claim. And they do demonize Korean men. Well, I live here and I speak to Korean men on a daily basis, and I'm telling you all that they're not all like that. They also view these kind of incidents as abhorrent and disgusting. But those TikTok people just don't believe anything that I say. But they call me a pick-me and say that I'm bootlicking the boots of Korean men. So it's like talking to a brick wall. Also, people saying misandry and harmful stereotypes are not real. I got this in my YouTube comment the other day. This was from my live the other day with David about Hai versus Minijin. This user left a whole essay and said, I wish BTS would move out of Korea after their service because Koreans don't deserve them. Koreans are so ungrateful. No wonder 80% of their men have small dicks. I'll let that comment speak for itself. I was lucky, and I do feel privileged for this. I was very lucky to grow up with a best father that I could have ever asked for. Most gentle, caring, sacrificed so much for me and my brother. And he showed me the best example of what it is to be a responsible, kind man. And also, I've seen nothing but examples of happy marriages within my family where the men are really hardworking providers and they're very supportive. And so that's the kind of stuff that I grew up seeing. And so I don't hate men for just existing. I do realize not everyone had that experience growing up, and it's like I said, I very much sympathize. But yeah, I just don't believe that all men are inherently evil. I don't agree with that. Even though some TikTok comments told me that I shouldn't trust my dad and my brother because they are also potential rapists. Like, I just have to laugh. I feel like I should address the gender pay gap thing as well. This is contributed to so many factors. So how they calculate this pay gap is they look at the difference between the average earnings of all men and women. They don't take into account different factors in occupation. A lot more men end up going into STEM fields compared to women. Women on the whole end up choosing less well-paid jobs compared to men. It also doesn't take into account different education levels, nor the number of hours worked per week. Men around the world, on the whole, tend to work longer hours than women. According to the 2022 Seoul Metropolitan Government's gender wage gap explanation data, 75% of employees who work night and holiday shifts at the Seoul Transportation Corporation are men. In addition, male employees were mainly in charge of night shifts at the Seoul Facilities Management Corporation and the Seoul Industrial Promotion Agency. Men were paid higher than women working in the same position by working overtime. But also, the most hardest and dangerous jobs are done by majority men. Construction, working on oil rigs, bricklaying, working on power lines, roofers, firefighters. Most of these jobs are dangerous and many can get injured or killed on the job. Women don't choose these sorts of jobs. And also, there's always that conversation about there aren't enough females in high CEO positions or in government, which is very true and valid. But also on the reverse, there is hardly any, if any, female representation in those hard labor jobs as well. Oh, and to also address the comment that I made in my TikTok video about me getting aged out of the marriage market, people were saying I have internalized misogyny because I said that. Like, all I meant by that was women have a fertility window, and this is just pure biology. If you want to have kids, you have a certain deadline. Once you start to reaching your mid-30s, it becomes much, much harder for you to be able to conceive. That's all I meant. And it does not mean I have internalized self-hatred or internalized hatred of women. I know that not everyone in those TikTok comments were like feminazis and about hating men, but I'm addressing the many of you that were. I think just blindly arguing that men are just so privileged and they don't have any issues or problems of their own. I think this is just not true. Both sexes have our own struggles and our own issues. So just screaming and arguing and placing blame on the vast majority of normal people who are not criminals or rapists or murderers, this really isn't helpful and it only makes the gender wars worse. Genuinely, in my circle of friends, I don't see any incels and I only see happy, positive, hardworking people who want to find love in relationships, and people wanting to have companions and reproduce should not be seen as a bad thing. Wouldn't you rather have a society that's filled with love and support for one another rather than hate and resentment and segregation? I believe that women are like yin and yang. We are definitely not the same. We are different from one another, but living in harmony with one another and trying to make it work, I think is one of the most beautiful things. And I think we should be trying to preserve this instead of actively trying to destroy it. I'm going to leave links down below about the world crime rate, about Korea's crime rate, as well as some articles I thought was interesting about Korea's low birth rate. So go check those out if you want to. In conclusion, I love women and support women. Like, obviously, because I'm a woman myself, but I also love and support men. There are definitely so many places in the world where women are seriously being oppressed. Female genital mutilation, no access to education, honor killings, restricted rights. So Korea is obviously far from perfect, but I genuinely feel blessed to be living in a country like this rather than one of those places. And to be perfectly honest with you, I feel 1000% much safer here walking around at night compared to when I was living in London.
Do you hope to have a family one day?
Yoon Young-her and Suk Jun Lee are soon to be married, but they aren't sure they can afford a baby. There is such a lot of pressure to get ahead, Yoon told me. So private education is not an option, it's a must. Korea is the most expensive country in the world to raise a child, partly because success depends on getting top grades at the very best schools. For the Lees, who welcomed little Si-jun to the world 4 months ago, crushing school fees are still some way off. But Mom So-min says the bills started to pile up the minute she got pregnant.
Hospitals?
네, hospital.
And doctors?
Korea's government has spent $200 billion to boost the birth rate, including a monthly subsidy to help with baby expenses. But those, of course, are just the beginning.
Good school, good university, eventually a good partner or wife. It starts here and goes for decades.
And before he gets to elementary school, So-min says, I'd like him to learn basics like maybe martial arts or swimming. These tiny creatures turn into such giant commitments. The country may want more of them, but more and more young people are deciding, however adorable, they can do without. For CBS Mornings, Elizabeth Palmer, Seoul, South Korea.
I mean,
You have 4
I have 4.
in 2 countries.
And I'm 25 years old, and I look like this.
I
That's
know,
before, I have
amazing.
4 kids will do a lot to you. But look, she's talking about South Korea, but, you know, there are a lot of families here who are also looking at the cost of college, the cost of housing, the cost of medical, and thinking, I'm only going to have 1 or no kids at all.
Right. Daycare is unbelievably expensive.